Oil and gas makes modern life possible. The energy the world requires today and tomorrow will come from decisions made in the oil field today. Oil and gas will remain the leading source of fuel to power affordable energy that is sustainable for the billions of people that depend on the success of the industry. The oil field is a group of people, companies, technologies, and institutions working towards providing the world with safe, clean, storable, and transportable power. The Oilfield 360 podcast is a 360-degree deep dive into the leaders of the industry, who will provide listeners with a first-hand account of what it takes to build, maintain, and lead the energy business into the future. The Oilfield 360 podcast is brought to you by the following sponsors: Locked-in Global Energy and Marine, uncommonly independent. Locked-in is the world's largest privately owned insurance broker and risk finance advisor. Locked-in's global energy expertise is centered in Houston and represents the largest concentration of energy specialists, clients, and experiential knowledge in the upstream, midstream, and downstream segments of the oil and gas industry. Visit lockedin.com for more information. Upright Digital. Upright Digital specializes in partnering with your business to maximize marketing efficiencies. We have a deep understanding of people, their needs, motivations, behaviors, as well as the technologies that enable brands in many industries to utilize what is available in a changing digital landscape. Find us online at uprightdigital.com.
Welcome back to the Oilfield 360. I'm your host, joined by my lovely co-host, Victoria Beard. How are you doing, Victoria?
I'm great. It's fall. There's a little, cooler nip in the air. It's wonderful.
Is it really fall?
Kind of. It's like 70-something today or 74 this morning.
Really?
Or maybe I just had my AC on in my house.
You still think you're in Pebble Beach.
It's true. Take me back.
Yeah.
NOV Rig Technologies helps drilling crews work safer and smarter. Process automation technologies such as Novos and multi-machine control optimize critical drilling and pipe handling tasks, while Atom RTX robotics improves safety and performance. On land or offshore, we're with you at every turn. Learn more at NOV.com. And now, back to the show.
So that was interesting. Come back from nice trip, visiting with some friends last week, and come back to the reality of heat and the start of school.
Yes, and college football kicked off.
Yeah.
It was a big game for my LSU Tigers.
Yeah. Claire and I were, I hate to admit, over this Labor Day weekend, we had to attend a 50th birthday party in Las Vegas.
Is that hard?
It was a 48-hour deal. I only allowed us to go for 24 hours, but she may have made a wager on the LSU game and did okay. And she put her money back in for the national championship. So she's going all the way. She's feeling pretty strong about
I
the Tigers.
love that about my sorority sister, Claire Bear.
Yeah.
I actually, on the other hand, sadly did not pick them to win at my college football pick'em. So had to eat a little bit of crow with that in the office, but
Really?
I've self-corrected. I'm now, going the course. Go Tigers all the way.
Hey. Well, that's admirable. You admitted that at least. You know,
Absolutely.
being a Tiger. So, anyhow, well, I can certainly tell. People are ready to get back to it. Avalon Diner, both days I've had breakfast there for meetings, and it has been jam-packed full of people trying to get stuff done. We were talking about earlier, y'all are starting to get a lot of phone calls again. Not that you didn't have any, but there's certainly a uptick. People have come out of the fog and are ready to get back to work.
Absolutely. It's a mad push until Thanksgiving.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're not here just to talk about our views of start of the week. We've got a great guest joining us, and a friend of ours, and a great friend of the industry, Danny Brown, CEO of Chord Energy. Glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
We appreciate you coming on. And Danny is we were talking earlier, we kind of like to start our podcast with a little bio sketch of our guest, where you're from and how you got in the energy business.
Yeah.
So maybe we could start out with a little bit of that.
So actually a Houston native, which I think about.
There's not a lot of y'all.
I know there's not a lot.
Marshall Hudson's also a Houston native.
Yeah. And there's even, I mean, from an industry standpoint, I think even less, because you grow up in Houston, you see some of the booms and busts, and sometimes that scares folks away. But Houston native, grew up on the southwest side of town, area town called Alief, fighting Texas Aggie. So stayed in Texas for that. Father wasn't really in the industry; he was in the engineering side of the game. So he worked for Brown and Roode, and he did all kinds of stuff for them. Sure, electrical engineer. So didn't really come into industry necessarily because I had a strong family connection to it. I'd say, in fact, I dabbled with being honest to goodness. I wondered if I was going to be an author, fiction.
Really?
Yeah, I dabbled with that. I went in and started college as a biology major, switched majors a few times. Finally figured out I didn't want to go into medicine. And if you're not going to go into medicine, then that kind of leaves academia with biology, which I did not want to do either. And so I kind of translated this interest in understanding how living things works to understanding how inanimate things work. And so more physics-based things. And clearly there's not a sort of direct monetary application for that as well in the pure science form, but sort of translate that to solving world problems, and you quickly find yourself in engineering. So, and we found myself in engineering, mechanical engineer at A&M, flubbed an interview to go work for Nike.
Really?
Yeah. And so Nike used mechanical engineers to go to design their shoes, and I thought that sounded pretty cool to go up to the Pacific Northwest, beautiful part of the world.
Now, how'd you flub it?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Learned.
I don't know, but I was a young kid in college. I didn't have a lot of engineering practice. I will say it wasn't the first interview I felt like I didn't perform well in, and so, but it was the one that said I just need to get more practice interviewing. I just need to accept every interview that comes through the door and get practice doing this and get more comfortable. And so I end up interviewing with an oil and gas company whom I'd never heard of before, had no intent on going to work for, and was smitten about halfway through the interview. I was just absolutely in love with this company and the concept of going to work for them. The company was Kerr-McGee. And so that was sort of the start of my industry career. Not necessarily by design, but it's how it all worked out. And I can't imagine doing anything else now. It's just such a fascinating industry. I'm glad to have been part of it. Hope I've made some contribution to it along the way. And yeah, I can't imagine doing anything else. Wouldn't want to do anything else. I think it's the most fascinating business you can be in.
So now, how'd you get from Kerr-McGee to where you are now?
So so I started the work at Kerr-McGee in 97. They were moving. They were closing down the oil and gas headquarters. So Kerr-McGee was a conglomerate. We had nuclear division, coal division, forest products, all these different divisions. Oil and gas headquarters was Lafayette, Louisiana. And if you know Lafayette in southern Louisiana, there's a lot of people grow a lot of roots down there. And so when they decided to move the oil and gas headquarters from Lafayette to Houston, a lot of folks decided they didn't want to come. And so that included some of the folks in the construction department. It was a pretty offshore-focused group where I went into. I've spent about half my career on offshore international things, conventional things, about half in U.S. onshore, unconventional. Anyway, they had a lot of their construction department that didn't come down. They were looking for a mechanical engineer. I hired on. So that's how I got to Kerr-McGee. Stayed offshore essentially the whole time. Ended up sort of playing like a petroleum engineer. I was a reservoir engineer, made a bunch of deep water discoveries, worked with the exploration team, got known as being the guy who installed and started up all of our spars, the big deep water sort of floating facilities. That's what I did for the first probably 10 years of my career. Lived in New Iberia, Louisiana for a while and worked in a fabrication yard down there. That was kind of my start in industry. And anyway, in 2006, we were bought by Anadarko. And so Anadarko acquired Kerr-McGee in 2006. Coincidentally, about 6 months before that, I'd gone to my boss, and Kerr-McGee had a small onshore contingent. It was mostly known as an offshore company. In fact, the first commercial offshore well ever was a Kerr-McGee well. And so that's kind of its claim to fame as an organization. The first offshore well is largely credited to being a Kerr-McGee well. And that's what I did. But we had this small onshore group, and the really sort of, interesting stuff that people wanted to be involved with was these big deep water projects. That was all the rage. But I saw this aspect of industry that I didn't know a lot about, onshore. And so I asked my boss, I said, look, when it's time to move around, if you'd consider me to go maybe work as a drilling engineer, maybe do something onshore, I'd just like to learn about that part of the business. So they said, okay, and they kind of filed that away. And so then the Kerr-McGee transaction happens in 2006, and they moved me to be a completions, production and completions manager in East Texas. And so I went and worked the Carthage Field in Anadarko. We were still doing vertical completions, horizontal, so shale's not a thing yet, but we were starting to do big multi-stage fracking. And so I'd never done completions work before. I'd never worked onshore before. And here I was, this deep water reservoir engineer, and I'm going to work onshore in East Texas, doing completions, which I'd never done before. I didn't have any academic background. I didn't have any practical background in it. I had some reservoir and some facilities experience. But from a facilities experience, like big deep water facilities, not onshore facilities. And so it was fascinating and humbling, and got to learn a lot. And ended up moving over to the chalk. I had a bunch of different assets that reported to me, and so we did the sort of multi-stage fracking thing in East Texas. We were doing horizontal drilling in Austin Chalk, and then lo and behold, Mitchell et al. Start doing sort of combining those things, and we kind of quickly followed suit, and then was able to do a lot across the lower 48 and a bunch of different basins that Anadarko was in. Bounced back and forth at Anadarko between Deepwater and International and U.S. onshore. Anadarko, as you know, was bought by Occidental Petroleum in 2019. And so my last two roles at Anadarko, I was the executive vice president over International and Deepwater. And then my final role was executive vice president over U.S. onshore. We didn't have a COO. We had these two EVPs over the two operating arms. And so I held both of those roles as my last two roles at Anadarko before Occidental purchased us. And then so that was August of 2019. And I thought I'd take 6 months off and then go back to work. Well, 6 months later was right when COVID hit. And so here I was, too young to sort of hang it up on the sidelines, but now in a bit of a quandary on what do I do? Saudi, Russia has an oil price war going on. The whole world's coming to an end with this global pandemic. And so I decided that it probably wasn't the ideal time to go back to work. And then sort of along with this was this whole rise in ESG investing, and it was going to be the end of oil and gas sort of demand as we know it, which was obviously nonsensical. But anyway, that was the narrative. And so it made the timing on getting back to work sort of, questionable. And so I decided to stay on the sidelines for a little while longer. I got to the end of, toward the tail end of 2020. And so now I'd been not working for over a year. Pretty low stress lifestyle. Kids are out of school because of COVID. And so lots of time with the family. It was great. I mean, honestly, it was great. I wouldn't trade those days for anything. And we were at my wife's an only child. Her parents have a lake house in the hill country. And so because she's an only child, we kind of get full run of that place. And I wasn't working. The kids were out of school. So we were at the lake house. And I came downstairs. And my daughter asked me how I slept, my oldest. And I said, I slept fine, but I had another dream about bees. And she said, you had a dream about bees? And I said, yeah, it's like the third night in a row I've dreamed about bees. So being a kid and sort of, in 2020, she grabs her phone and Googles up, what do dreams about bees mean? And I don't know, there's probably 50 different things that dreams about, but the first one that popped up on her feed was that you dream about bees because you feel unproductive, because bees are so industrious, etc. And if you're dreaming about bees, you're lacking that in your life and you're feeling unproductive. And it hit me like a lightning bolt. And I've always been like, people should be at their highest and best use. And so here I was sort of, probably in the prime of my working life, just, hanging around with my kids. It was awesome, but I wasn't at my highest and best use and I wasn't feeling productive. And I was like, I've got to go back to work. And so I got serious about going back to work and found an opportunity with a company called Oasis Petroleum, who'd gone through bankruptcy and was looking, their CEO had retired and was looking for a new CEO. and was thankful to land that job. And it's been a really, really fun ride since April of 21 until today. Sort of, helping to steward that organization. We did a merger. We've changed our name since to Chord. I view it as a new enterprise now, not sort of a continuation of Oasis, but something new.
Sure.
But anyway, it's been a fantastic journey, a lot of fun.
So you went from no trees to no trees and trees
Yes.
again.
Yeah.
And I think you and I met. We were on the board of NOIA together.
Yeah.
When you were on the board.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating. So tell us a little bit about your experience being offshore with two very well known operators and successful operators. In what it's like, working in that environment, coming onshore, and did you take anything from your offshore experience into the onshore experience?
Yeah, and I'd say vice versa, honestly, from both. And it's really fascinating. And if people have been fortunate enough to work in both, they're almost like different businesses. I mean, we produce the same commodity, but the way the businesses are run are so fundamentally different from one another, and out of necessity. The offshore wells we drill, months and months and months, maybe years in planning for those wells. And, the full well cost for an offshore well after it's completed is, call it till the $200 million. In comparison, so 20 times maybe as expensive, maybe more than that, than an onshore well. Much, much bigger reservoirs, et cetera. So the stakes are just so much higher from an offshore perspective. And I actually... Oftentimes, it seems like folks' careers was they would start onshore on small things and then build themselves up to some of these bigger offshore projects. And that seemed to be like the normal progression, at least from my observations. And I always thought that was interesting because I did the exact opposite. I started offshore and came onshore. And I actually think it was really helpful because you learned, you learned that detailed planning offshore. And to plan to an nth degree and to really study the subsurface and really study and think about the project and planning it out because the consequences were so significant. And then you could pair that back where you didn't need it, where it wasn't applicable from an onshore perspective, but you could have that overall mindset. Whereas I think onshore, it was more difficult maybe to get yourself into a whole different mindset. Oh, wait, I've got to really expand the investigation, the risk analysis on this. Maybe I need to, do whole different engineering analysis that we wouldn't do, that would just not, it wouldn't be applicable onshore. And you may not think to do it offshore. Whereas if you do it offshore, you can understand pretty quickly, I don't need to do that in an onshore environment, but that's always part of your toolkit. So I thought it was a really healthy thing actually to start offshore and move onshore because it just gave me a different mindset. One of the things I'd say applicable to my business right now, one of the things that Oasis was facing as we were developing our Bakken position. So for those that aren't familiar with Chord, by the way, we're the largest producer in the Bakken formation in the Williston Basin in North Dakota, and really the aggregation of three historic companies and legacy companies in the basin: Oasis, Petroleum, Petroleum, and Enerplus. And so we put all three of those organizations under one umbrella, Chord Energy, and we're now the largest producer in the Williston. But what Oasis was facing was they had this beautiful core position within the Williston Basin, but it was being pretty developed, and they had all this acreage outside of the core, and they were faced with the decision we were faced with the decision: how are we going to make economic returns that are just as good outside the core as we made in the core? And really, it was an offshore principle that was brought to bear, and that was, look, you've got a tank. Let's put as few sticks into that tank as we can possibly put in order to effectively drain the reservoir, which is the mindset we would take offshore. Hey, we've got this big reservoir. It's, largely all connected. These wells are expensive. How do we want to drill as few wells as possible? Whereas onshore, oftentimes it's like, how much inventory can I have? And so I'm going to take this section and I'm going to assume that I can do this same well, not just 5 times, I can do it 10 times within this section. Well, do you really need to do it 10 times within this section? Or can you get away with doing it 6 times, upsizing your frac job, still effectively drain the reservoir, but do it far more capitally efficiently than you would have otherwise? And so we took an approach on, hey, let's put as few sticks in as possible. So let's drill these wells as wide apart as we can, increase the size of our frac jobs, and drill them as long as we can, and to leverage that vertical section of the well. And the capital efficiency of the program shot through the roof, and our returns shot through the roof. And indeed, we're now making returns that are every bit as good as what we made in the core, outside of the core. So it's been pretty cool development.
Yeah, no, I think it's been interesting to watch y'all's performance as a company in that regard. And what I've always thought interesting about those who have been offshore that have gone onshore is this mindset of strategic planning. Not to say that there's not strategic planning that happens onshore, but onshore you can run away from things. Offshore you can't really, unless you swim.
Yes,
really well.
Yeah.
And then also too, because of the ability, you don't have the supply chain. You do, but it's different than onshore. And so you really got to think about everything that you do, to your point, be as efficient as possible. And I've always found it interesting when you take that mindset as it relates to deployment of resources, procurement, supply chain, even safety. Those who carry that with them into the onshore environment seem to, in my opinion, perform better than those that have gone the other way around, where they're you have some liberties onshore that you don't necessarily have offshore.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And project management becomes such a critical skill offshore. And when you think about it, in life, just a series of continuation of managing projects, whether sort of in your personal life or in your work life. And it's so critical offshore, and it's something that gets beat into you pretty solidly. And then you bring that with you really to all aspects of your life, including your onshore operations, which is beneficial.
Well, it certainly, I think, helps these days where, to your point, it's all about inventory onshore and this, that, and the other. And for a while it was production at all costs. Now there's a great deal of discipline being exercised. So with that discipline mindset coming into, what it takes to operate and survive in this environment, and particularly at least what prices are currently, I think so. A big advantage. We were talking earlier, Victoria and I, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the story behind the name Chord, why you chose Chord for the business.
Yeah, that's a cool story. So if I would have known going in how often it would be mispronounced as Chord instead of Chord, I might have chosen a different name. But the neat thing about Chord, and what really resonated with one, we when we put the two organizations together, we really did, and this was something that was really important to me, is I wanted this to be a catalyst for something new. And not sort of Oasis 2.0, not Whiting 2.0, but really a catalyst for something new. And if you're going to do that, I think a name change is important, sort of to help symbolize that new beginning. And as we thought about sort of the names we wanted, we decided we wanted an English dictionary name, like something you could actually find in the dictionary. And I am not begrudging or saying anything pejorative about anybody else's names that they've chosen, but we didn't want to sound like a pharmaceutical product. This was like, okay, we want to have a plain English name word. And so we started looking at different opportunities in it. And I will admit, we polled employees. We let all the employees of both Whiting and Chord Whiting and Oasis submit their ideas. We also hired a company, a branding company out of Dallas to help us a bit. I will tell you, I've heard what others we did. This was very inexpensive, so we did this on a shoestring budget. And I will say that it was that company who came to us, and they came to us with this idea of Chord. And really, part of the definition that they liked on Chord, and if you think Chord, there's two definitions on it, right? One is the mathematical definition that a chord is something that connects 2 points on a circle, right? And we were connecting Oasis and Whiting and sort of forming something new. So they liked that. Mental imagery. I like the musical thing about it, because if you, what is a chord? A chord is when you play multiple notes simultaneously to produce harmony. So that's the definition of a musical chord. And if you think about what we have to do as a
That's
business.
PBS.
Well, if you think about what we gotta produce safely, we've got to generate returns for our shareholders, we've got to create a good employee experience. We've got to do all these things simultaneously, and we've got to do them in harmony. And so I really like that concept of we've got to do these different. We've got to play these multiple notes, and we've got to play them simultaneously, and we've got to do it in harmony with one another, and that's a chord. And so that's really where the name comes from, is that concept of doing multiple things simultaneously and in harmony.
That makes a lot of sense. That's good.
I mean, with my marketing background, I love that story. And I know that it's very front and center on your website, but I appreciate you giving the additional color to all of our listeners. So kind of going back to the business, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe that y'all have been experimenting with 4-mile laterals.
Yes.
How is that going? And do you think we could ever get to a 5-mile?
Yeah. So 4-mile laterals are going well. They're going well. And so I actually just got, was at a conference in California last week. I was actually just at Barclays, got back from New York last night. Lots of investor questions about 4-mile laterals and how that's going for us. And I'd say it's going really well. We plan to have 7 in the ground and producing by the end of the year. We've got one producing currently. We've got 5 drilled currently. We've got 1 producing. We're going to bring a bunch online between now and the end of the year. The first one is really surpassing expectations, both from a production and from a cost perspective. So we're really, really encouraged with the first one. We put some information out in our last call associated with that. I'd say they're going well. What we need to see is, can we get them drilled without incident? Can we get them completed and get the job put away all the way to tow? And can we get them cleaned out to the tow? And can we do that within the cost, without train wrecks? And so we just need enough reps to understand, if you just do a small handful, that's not, I don't think you've proven repeatability that you can, if we're going to have a train wreck every 4 or 5 wells, we need to understand that, because we need to bake that into the program and understand how that impacts the overall program. And so we're going to do these 7. I think after these 7, which are in diverse parts of the field, we'll have a pretty good idea on how we're doing from an operational perspective. If we can do them well operationally, I think we'll pretty quickly pivot to having 4 miles be a really material part of the program, because we can actually withstand pretty reasonable degradation in the 4th mile from a contribution perspective, and it still be the right economic decision for us to move with a 4-mile development. And what we've seen with our 3 miles, and so about 2 years ago, we moved from a 2-mile program to a 3-mile program. It was part of that mentality of drill as few 6 in the ground as you could. And we were expecting getting about an 80% contribution from that 3rd mile. And we actually got 100% contribution from that 3rd mile. So we've seen no degradation from going from a 2-mile well to a 3-mile well. And so, I'm bullish that we won't see much degradation in the 4th mile, but we kind of underwritten the program with only getting 80% contribution. The program is absolutely the right thing to do. It can actually withstand even more degradation than that pretty easily. And it'd still be the right economic decision. So I think if we can do it operationally, we'll get there pretty quick. 5 miles. At some point,
Why not 50?
yeah. Well, it's funny. I saw back when it was still Twitter, I think I saw a meme one time, and it was this acreage position with one well in the middle with just this big spiral that drilled up the whole acreage position. So yeah, maybe we'll get to one big spiral well. Now at some point, the reality of your lease geometry, there's not a lot of practical application. Like, you can drill a 15-mile well, but when are you going to put a 15-mile sort of long lease block together and be able to do that repeatedly across the basin, where there's going to actually be some opportunity where you can build up, operational prowess and expertise in being able to execute that program? You're never going to be able to put an acreage position it's going to be so difficult to put an acreage position like that together. And so the longer we get, the more difficult it is to put these chunky blocks of acres together. We're advantaged for the 4-mile program because the whole basin was really set up to develop on 2 miles, and we got a lot of units that are stacked 2-mile units. And so if we can replace a stacked 2-mile units with a single 4-mile unit, that makes a lot of sense. If we've got a lot of stacked 2-mile units and we throw a 5-mile well in, now it's, what does that, how does the geometry starts to get more complicated on how do you make 5 miles work in the system. So there could be application for it. But I think probably more limited application just because of the lease geometry. You also have to think about like at some point, there's no doubt the further we go out, you're increasing mechanical risk. And so you're getting more access to the reservoir, but your mechanical risk is increasing too. And at some point, that leveraging the vertical section of the well and getting access to more lateral with every foot theoretically being your cheapest foot that you're drilling, at some point, the increased mechanical risk, it is also increasing. And at some point, it tells you you've crossed the line and it no longer makes sense to go forward. And even things like from an execution standpoint, imagine if we got 4.5 miles out and we lose a BHA and we got to trip pipe. That's a long time to pull 4.5 miles out. And so if we can consistently get to 4, but we're failing on the way to get to 5, well, it doesn't make any sense to go to 5 because now you've got all of this inefficiency you've dialed into the program. So, the 4-mile program is going good. I don't know. I never, candidly, not too long ago, I would have thought a 4-mile program sounded outlandish. And so who knows, maybe there are 5 miles in the future. I'll never say never, and I will never bet against the ingenuity of the engineer and development planner and onshore E&P organization. And so who knows where this will go, but we're pretty bullish on the 4-mile program, and then we see lots of good applicability for that. Lowers our break-evens by about $10 a barrel.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it's really significant.
So we've seen a lot of consolidation in our sector.
Yep.
When you think about the growth of your organization, do you see that happen organically or through consolidation, or maybe even both?
Yeah, I'd say for us right now, so when you say growth, you're talking production growth?
Yes, or just kind of in the next 5 years with your organization.
Yeah.
Like, where do you want to see it go? Or maybe you are happy where it is now?
No, I think, look, my belief is we're in a commodity business, and in a commodity business where you've got sort of no pricing power, we're in a commodity business with no pricing power. We're also in a cyclical business, and we're in an inventory depleting business. Besides that, it's awesome. And I actually mean that true. Besides that, it really is awesome. But those are we're big headwind. I mean, those are big things for us to consider from a strategic standpoint. And with that context and backdrop of just the reality of the industry that we're in, there's no doubt that larger companies have an advantage. It's just, bigger isn't necessarily better, but there are more ways to be better if you're bigger. You've got a better ability to attract and retain talent. You've got a better ability to get the good marketing agreements put together. You've got a better ability to work supply chains and get better deals for yourselves. It's just bigger companies have advantages. It's no doubt about that. And it's one of the reasons why we're a product of consolidation. We put these, 3 companies that we thought were all too small. We put them together to try to form Chord. And, candidly, there's a lot of arguments to be made. We're still too small, particularly from an investor standpoint in the energy space. We're such a small part. We're such a small part of the S&P. It's hard to get investors to look down cap at companies like ours. And if we were bigger, that would be helpful. I think the key is, though, you have to be focused on being better at the end of the day. So if you're getting bigger because you think it's going to make you better, awesome. But if you're getting big for big's sake, that's really, that's pretty thin rationale to go do that. So I would certainly like us to be bigger 5 years from now, because I think there are advantages to it. We just have to go about it the right way. And I think organic growth, I've not been a fan of organic growth for our organization while we have had a supply overhang out there from OPEC, because it has seemed almost irresponsible to me to deploy a lot of capital to put into the ground to grow an organic production when your pricing could fall away from you like that with just a decision on a whim. So I'm actually a fan of getting this OPEC spare capacity back online. I think it's been very difficult for us to plan our business. It's been this, I called it the sword of Damocles. It's sort of been hanging over our heads. And I think we've geared our organization to be resilient in the face of that. And I would like to get it all back online, let the chips fall where they may, but at least we'll have this supply overhang dynamic out of the system. And now we can just look at the macroeconomy and think, where's the macroeconomy going? Where's the global demand going? And now we can think about how to plan our business. If we had the supply back on the market and we were constructive about the macroeconomy and where demand's going, I think growth might be a really rational thing for us to do. I haven't thought it was a rational thing to do with the supply overhang out there. So organic growth, I've been a little nebulous of. But inorganic growth, growing through consolidation, I've been a big fan of, and we've done that through these different things. So anyway, organic growth, we'll see 5 years from now, what does the supply demand balance look like? I think that will depend on what we do from that perspective. But with respect to consolidating, buying new assets, potentially mergers. I mean, we're the product of 3 different mergers. That's certainly a potential for us. Bigger is not necessarily better. More opportunities to be better if you're bigger, and so we would like to be bigger.
Do you think you will expand in these the basins?
It's tough to. We really want to produce, I would say, strong risk-adjusted value, and I won't say we won't go into other basins, but we just have to be clear-eyed about the risk of going into other basins. And by that, I mean, we got in the Williston Basin, we've got 1.3 million acres. If you look at our acreage map projected against the basin itself, stretches from east to west and north to south. So any asset that comes for sale in the Williston, I've probably got operating folks that are driving right by those wells anyway, so we could easily fold that into our operations. We've got supply chains put in place. We know the subsurface across the entire breadth of the basin. And so the risk of us being able to develop that asset successfully is really small. And the opportunity for us to bring synergies and, improved operational performance with really any asset that we've got, I think is significant. So we've got a lot of ways to create value with in-basin deals. If we look at a basin, we don't know the subsurface out of basin. We don't know we don't have supply chains in place. We don't have an asset team to go prosecute a development program out of basin, which means we've got to risk all in. And as we think about how an out of basin asset would deliver value, I've got to put more risk against it. And so it's just tough for us to risk that and then be competitive in a process to go find an asset when we've got extra layers of risk that I think we necessarily need to put on it. So we look at it. I think we should look at it because we learn something every time we look. But I think we also just have to be thoughtful about, we need to be confident we can deliver sort of, full cycle value, even for the incremental risk that we need to place on it because we're not a basin incumbent. And so it makes it tough to do. So I think the good news is I think there's still good opportunities in Williston. And, it could be that someday we're able to clear that hurdle and have confidence that we can deliver risk-adjusted value. But I think we just need to make sure that we're doing it smartly. Yeah.
I think it's interesting, given the meeting we were at last week, some of the discussion around there being concern around how much spare capacity there is in OPEC relative to what we thought. And, I'd like for somebody to really, get a firm accounting of things because it seems to change, either they got a lot of gas in the tank or they're really playing chicken, so but to your point, I think there's got to be a sense of accountability there for stability, not only in y'all's budgeting and everybody else's, but theirs as well.
Yeah. It's interesting if you look at there's the sort of expert reports that are out there are a bit all over the place. And so who do you believe? And so it will be interesting if you look at, you've got some that look at supply demand forecast as we look out into the future. Maybe the most constructive from an oil price perspective being the OPEC numbers, which I think are credible numbers they put out. I mean, but they're showing very modest inventory builds as we move into 2026, and very short-lived. And then you compare it to IEA, which is showing much more significant inventory builds and what would probably be a more significant downside potential for price. Where does the truth lie? I'm not sure. Time will tell. So we'll see.
When we think about kind of the macro environment we're in now, and you touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the things that kind of pop into your head as related to your decision-making abilities for your organization? Is it like the Fed policy? Is it obviously like oil pricing? Does tariffs come into it? What are some of the things that keep you up at night when you think about macro?
Yeah. So the cool thing is I think we've got just a super resilient organization and by design, right? I mean, as we've taken these steps to become the company we are today, it's all been with this mindset, with those 3 things I talked about earlier. We're in a commodity business. It's cyclical. You've got no control, and And so if you're in a cyclical business that's fairly inelastic, you're going to have big pricing swings. And so you just have to build an organization that can weather that. And so one of the things we've done is we've got a really strong balance sheet. The original Chord is originally comprised of Oasis and Whiting Petroleum, both of whom went through bankruptcy. One of the reasons I came into the organization. And we wear the scars of that pretty significantly in the company and don't ever want to go back through that. And so protecting the balance sheet and having a strong balance sheet is really important to us and really important to me as we move forward. One of the nice things is when you face with this uncertainty, though, when you've got significant, potential for macroeconomic uncertainty, Fed policy, tariffs, whatever it is, when you've built this organization that's really resilient, we've got a low reinvestment rate, which is super helpful. We've got essentially, I'm not going to say no debt, but we've got very low debt, and so interest payments aren't an issue. We don't have any minimum volume commitments to speak of, meaning from a midstream perspective, I'm not obligated to send gas to anyone or have to, pay fees. And there's no real drilling commitments we got where we have to continue to develop acreage. We've laddered all of our contracts, and so I've got 4 rigs working now. They roll off about every quarter. We've structured our completions agreements so that we can sort of stop on a dime with no penalty. And so we got like ultimate flexibility as an organization. And so not a lot keeps me up at night, honestly. I mean, we work in a dangerous business, and so making sure that people go home safe every day is always something I think about. And making sure that we're getting better every day. I mean, really, that's what I'm trying to push through the organization is a concept of we need to make tomorrow better than today, every day. But we've created this organization that's really resilient, it makes it really nice in environments of uncertainty or when you're staring at potential, big supply coming back into the market. You're playing from a position of strength because you've built the organization to weather these inevitable shocking events from a macroeconomic perspective. But like anything, we've got a plan. And so we've got a view on mid-cycle pricing. We've got a view on where oil price is going to be in the near term. And what we think about is how do we allocate capital as an organization? And we just try to make really smart capital allocation decisions. And when we think about capital allocation, it's really kind of 4 buckets. We can put money to the balance sheet. We've got a really good balance sheet right now, so that doesn't pull a lot of capital for us. We can fund organic activity. I mentioned, I'm trying to run a maintenance program because of this supply overhang. And so that really leaves us 2 options with free cash flow that's coming in the door. It's M&A. We can go look to acquire assets, or I can return capital to shareholders either through dividends or share repurchases. And so really that's where I'm looking at from let's run a maintenance program as an organization. We can weather commodity prices down to pretty low environments. If that got down into the 50s, I might look at pulling activity back. And then I'd look at those with free cash flow coming through the door. I would look at those other 2 options. Should we look at M&A instead of funding organic activity, or should we look at potentially repurchasing shares? My expectation is if oil went to the 50s, our share price would go down too, and our shares would probably be a pretty compelling investment. And then we'd be faced with a decision: are we better to invest in organic activity in a market that the world's telling us is oversupplied by the pricing response, or into a discounted share that's also reflecting what we think it would be a temporary condition of lower prices? And so that could be a compelling investment opportunity for us.
So you have a pretty diverse board,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is fantastic. What are some of the top characteristics you have looked at or will be looking at for those board members?
So, we do have a diverse board. I'm a big believer in diversity of thought. It's really, I've got it on my executive team too. We are not a sort of monolithic sort of organization, either from a board perspective or a senior management perspective. We get really diverse opinions and thoughts, which I love. So I think that diversity of thought is really, really important. We've got, different experiences. Our chair also has a background maybe similar to mine in that she was, her last, I think, corporate role was executive vice president overseeing exploration for Noble. And so she's got this, explorationist mind. She's a geoscientist and has an explorationist mindset, which I think is really helpful to have access to on the board of directors. We have some folks that have been investors in the space for a long, long time. We got folks that have been former CEOs. And I think it's that diversity of thought but sort of consistency and maybe unanimity in what the ultimate goal for the organization is really important, right? So we may have different opinions on assumptions and tactics, but we all want to sort of accomplish the same thing. And that's a pretty great place to be. It's been interesting, though, because the board has been an aggregation of the directors of these three different companies. And honestly, if you think about taking directors from three different organizations together and putting them together, that's kind of a recipe for potential, a lot of dysfunction, etc. And I'll give our chair a lot of credit. She's very purposeful about being thoughtful and deliberate about how we brought the board together. We had an offsite. We sort of all agreed on the behaviors we wanted to display, ultimately what we were trying to accomplish as an organization, sort of what was expected of the directors, norms of behavior within the board meetings, et cetera. And we did that early on. And I think being very purposeful and deliberate about that was really, really important. It's paid dividends. And I would say the board gets together, actually performs. It is a high-performing board, which is fantastic considering how it was aggregated, how quickly it came together.
So kind of on that same theme, I mean, if you think about your employees, right, there was also integration with them. What were some of the key things that you feel made it so successful? And is there anything you reflect on that you're like, oh, maybe we should have done that a little bit differently?
Yeah, certainly lessons learned. And in fact, when we did the Whiting and Oasis merger, we actually put a book together. So we had like a 3-ring binder full of lessons learned, which was cool because when we did the Enerplus acquisition, we had this fresh lessons learned that we said, okay, here's where we messed it up last go around. Let's make sure we don't make the same mistake twice. We made new mistakes, but anyway, we did, and we tried not to repeat the same mistakes twice, right? And by all accounts, it went much better the second go around, and it's not like it went bad the first time around. One of the things I mentioned, we tried to catalyze something new, and I think that was the big thing. And we kind of said, look, we want the best way to do things. And if the best way was the Oasis way, great. The best way was the Whiting way, great. And neither one of those is fit for purpose for what we're accomplishing. We're going to choose alternative C. And so we're going to go through and we're going to evaluate how we did things, how both companies did things. And then we're going to compare that against what we think best practice is and whatever and we're going to go down that route. One of the things we learned is we did that from a systems perspective as well. And we chose the best systems to accomplish the task. We didn't think as much as we should have about how all those systems were going to stitch together. And that was a big lesson for us in the Oasis and Whiting merger. And one we didn't repeat that mistake from an Enerplus perspective. I think one of the things we also did through the process is we committed early on to really frequent communication and really transparent communication. And we treated everyone, I think, with empathy, but also transparency and like adults. And one of the first things we said as we did the Whiting and Oasis transaction was there's going to be job reductions. It's just we're going to be straightforward about that. And we're going to let people know as soon as we can, and we're going to be as thoughtful as we can. And we're going to try and make sure that the folks that are best suited to take these roles move forward in the roles. And we're going to make mistakes, and we'll own the fact that we're going to make mistakes because we're human and we're valuable and we're not perfect, but we're going to do the best job we can. And we had, standard communication that went out at a minimum of every 2 weeks. And in that communication, we were very transparent. This is what's happened. These are when the decisions are coming. These are when these departments will find out, et cetera. And it was tough, but I think it was, at the end of the day, I think folks respected and appreciated that. They might not have liked the news that they got, but at least there was no feeling that we weren't being honest with folks. And because I just think that undermines credibility and trust, and you don't do yourselves any favors if you go do that. So that was one thing we did in both transactions that I think served us well. And so there's no doubt we made mistakes with process and systems, et cetera. But one of the things that we committed to was we've got to make decisions, and we'll try to course correct along the way if we make the wrong decisions. And so anyway, I think it's gone reasonably well. There's things we do differently if we could go do it all over again, but I think that's just life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just life.
Well, and anytime there's change, right, it can bring up anxiety in people. And so I think your direction of being very transparent, even though again the messaging could maybe be hard, can kind of settle and hopefully allow people to continue to do their job, but know, kind of what management is thinking.
Yeah. I think that trust in uh, trust in your senior management team is just critical, because these are the individuals that are ultimately setting the strategic direction of your organization. And like if you don't trust them and what it is that they're doing, and man, you may disagree with them, and that's okay. But understanding that they're coming at it from the right place and that they're being transparent, I think is really important. And it extends beyond that as well. And so it's important through the integration time. I think it's just as important as you get past that integration and you're working through just the day-to-day business, to know that your management team is being honest with you. And I certainly wouldn't want to work in an environment where I didn't feel that way. And I suspect everybody's like that.
I think anytime you can take the bite of surprise out of the equation, you're always better. And, to Victoria's point, people may not want to hear what you have to say, but they respect you for it at the end of the day. All right. 'Cause people don't like change and they certainly don't like surprises.
Yeah. Change is tough. Yeah. Change is tough. But honestly, that's what leadership's about.
Yeah.
And one thing I've always said is the essence of leadership is change. Without change, you don't need leaders. You need process. Leadership is about change. Almost by definition, you're taking people from one place to another, and that involves change. And so, but that's tough. Change is tough for people.
So when you talk about your leadership style, is there anybody, or I'm sure there is, or who were your mentors that you kind of looked up to throughout your career?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I'm reluctant to, because I'll forget people, right?
You're accepting an award at the Oscars.
Yeah, I know.
I'm gonna forget somebody.
Yeah, hurt feelings at the end of the day.
Well, maybe just one top story that comes up with one of your mentors.
So I will. I had a slew of fantastic mentors for me over the years. I will tell you the piece of advice I got from one of my mentors. And so back at Anadarko, things were going pretty well, and there was a time period where, man, every well we drilled, we hit pay dirt, right? And it was another new big discovery, and the onshore assets we had were producing really well, and we were growing significantly, and the stock price was performing fantastically. And there was a group of a fairly small group of us that were involved in a lot of that, and were seen as some of the up and coming leaders in the organization that were helping to sort of deliver some of these results. And goodness knows we all had strong teams that we were working with, et cetera. And so credits to them and not to us. But we got called into a meeting with one of our senior folks who was a significant mentor of mine. And in some ways, I thought it was going to be a little bit of a rah-rah pat on the back session. Hey, this is all going really great, and et cetera. And it wasn't. And his comment to us, it really struck me. He said, essentially acknowledged things were going well in the organization. The organization was performing well. And his advice to us was, stay humble and know you can improve. And I thought it was just and it wasn't what I was expecting, but it's what we all needed to hear. Not because we were arrogant or thinking other stuff, but it's a truism in life. And it's like, no matter how well things are going, you ought to stay humble and know you can get better. And it goes back to that concept I talked about a second ago of making tomorrow better than today. And it's really the essence of it. If you get up in the morning and you don't think you can make tomorrow better than today, why are you even getting out of bed? That's the whole purpose of life, and is to improve and to get a little better. But that it's hard to improve and to have a desire to improve unless you have the humility to admit that there's things you can improve on. So they both go together with one another. And anyway, it's a powerful piece of advice to me that impacted not just my work life, but sort of my overall life, right? Because I can be better. I can be a better husband, a better father, a better, member of my church, a better employee, everything, a better leader for Chord. And so it's kind of a powerful truism back on life. And it was something that has really shaped my outlook on life ever since I heard that comment. And it's the one piece of advice I'll give anybody. They say, "Hey, what's the best piece of advice you got?" That's always it. That's always it.
So I kind of have a fun question.
Yep.
So imagine Chord is a baseball player.
Okay.
What would the walk-up song be?
Oh gosh.
Sorry if I don't want to stump you, but it's kind of a fun one.
Oh, I don't know.
That's a new question.
That is a totally. I got to think about it. So I can't be flippant about that answer, and I've got to. I mean, it's got to be something about sort of, oh gosh, what an unsatisfactory thing that I can't come up with like a really strong thing. I don't know. I'm going to think about it.
Okay, we can come back to it. So you're a big Aggie alum. What is maybe one of your favorite traditions or one of your favorite memories of being there?
Oh, yeah. Favorite tradition has to be muster. It's just that's such a cool
What is that?
thing. So Aggie muster is when you recognize the Aggies who passed on over the previous year. And it's just it's a cool tradition that you get together once a year to sort of recognize that. And it starts from sort of, the oldest alum all the way through to people who maybe just graduate, maybe some that are still even in school. And so that's always, I think, and people around the world get together to call the muster, and essentially they'll call roll, and people, generally family members, but sometimes friends, will answer for whoever's not, no longer with us. So I think that's a really neat tradition for folks who, even Aggies who haven't actually gone to a muster before, do that. It's a really moving thing. So that's something that's really cool. And I will say the Aggie network is just, gosh, it's so, people are passionate about A&M and the traditions and whatnot, and I think for good reason. And so that's been a fantastic experience to be a part of, and to feel like you're, part of a community like that. Really, really cool. Favorite thing. I mean, going to football games was obviously great, but there's so many. I mean, I loved. I mean, this is going to sound so odd. One of the reasons I wanted to come back to work when I was sort of had that time off is I loved getting together in a team and solving problems and solving issues. And so I reflect back on my time in school and like working through some of our, upper level projects where we were working on projects together, and late nights in the library and coming together and doing projects. It was just so much a sense of sort of satisfaction and accomplishment as you would sort of work through that process and come by and have something that you were proud of. It's just wonderful. There's nothing else like it. It's one of the things I love. I can't imagine working in a business where it's very individualized, because that ability to accomplish something as a team that's far, far bigger than what you could ever do on your own. It's just it's amazing. There's nothing else like it. And we do it at scale in the oil and gas business, right? So it's one of the things I love about the industry. And you got a small taste of that in university. It's probably what I get to do it every day to day now. But as I reflect back on my college times, I mean, that's what I remember most of, are those kind of things.
It was that old African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go further, go together.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah, those Aggies are pretty passionate. We know some passionate guys. Obviously, a lot of good friends and clients and previous guests on this show are proud Aggies. It is a pretty amazing school. And Kevin McDonald and I were talking the other day about muster, and it's the traditions that exist at that university. And similarly, although not the same, but like Notre Dame and other old universities got a lot of traditions. I remember going to a Aggie Notre Dame game years ago, and at South Bend. That was pretty interesting experience, seeing two schools, a lot of tradition come together, and in both schools, both big feeders into the military.
So we obviously, the three of us, are super passionate about our sector. So if someone is listening and contemplating getting into oil and gas, what is your pitch?
One is it is so fundamental to everything that to human existence is the fact that we're sitting here today is because we have the time to sit here today, because we're not trying to sort of fight the elements and find food for ourselves or get clean water or have shelter for ourselves this evening. And the reason we don't have to do all that is because of fossil fuels and oil and gas. And so it is so integral to the advancement of the human condition, and it is not going anywhere for decades and decades and decades and decades. And so, for me, I think if you like to, and it's an industry that has something for everyone. If you're into big finance, it's got that. If you're into high technology, it's got that. If you want to get your hands dirty and be outside, you can do that. If you want to work with supercomputers and all the latest technology, you can do that. If you want to have an impact on travel the world, you can do that. If you want to have an impact on sort of geopolitics worldwide, you can do that too. It has really got it's real. I can't think of nothing, no sort of interest that can't be met within this space, and it is so fundamental to the human condition. I'm super passionate about it. For those who might not be interested in it, it's because they don't understand it. They don't understand how necessary it is. They don't understand what I think long life it's got in front of it. Oil is the most energy dense substance ever discovered, aside from uranium, and it's pretty complicated to do something with uranium, right? And so it's the most energy dense substance ever discovered, super fungible and easy to transport, and it's defies all logic to think that the demand for the most energy dense, easy to utilize, most easily transportable substance ever discovered by mankind, the demand is going to decrease, appreciably over time. It may plateau, but it's not going to decrease for a long, long time. And so it's going to be part of our lives for a long time. And it's a fascinating thing to explore, discover, and produce it in a responsible manner. And that's what we try to do every day. And it's super rewarding because, again, you can see the impact it has on lives. And we try to do it better than anybody else, both from an economic standpoint and from an environmental stewardship standpoint. And there's no reason you can't have both. And the U.S. has shown that we do it both ways. Our improvements in our environmental standards and our air emissions, et cetera, have been remarkable. And it's while we've grown our domestic production. And so there's this false choice that's out there. For so long there was a false choice, I think, around in the operations world, at least talked about around safety. It's like, well, you can get production or you can do a safe operation. No, that's not true. A well-planned, efficient operation is a safe operation and a high-producing operation and a cost-effective operation. You can have all of it. You just got to do your business right. And it's the same way from an environmental standpoint. We can have safe, environmentally responsible operations that also produce a heck of a lot of oil and natural gas, which is fantastic for humankind, and we're proud to do it. The good news is the narrative on this in the world has been awful for a few years, and unfortunately, as industry was silent and ceded the narrative, and I didn't think they needed to participate in the conversation for decades, and that vacuum was filled, and it was filled with a narrative that was distorted and, significantly unhelpful and distorted and largely not true. And thankfully, I think we're finding a voice now, and you're seeing much more willingness to speak up about the things that we do and the importance of what it is that we do. All of which has been encouraging to see folks, some of whom have been on y'all's on this podcast and other forums as well, be outspoken advocates of our industry and what it was doing, and proud advocates of what it is that we do. It's been awesome, and willing to go into the schools and into the high schools and talk about it. But I think that's always been a little discounted because of the source, right? Well, of course, you're an industry person. Of course, you're going to say these things that are beneficial about the industry. So it's kind of heartening to me. I will admit, I'm ashamed to admit, but I will admit, I have not seen a single episode of Landman. I don't have Paramount, I think is what it streams on. I don't have it. I haven't done it. At some point I will like get it. I'll binge watch it and I'll see it. But I see the clips on, YouTube and different stuff. And it's amazing to me the number of people who aren't in industry some of these senior executives of other organizations in different industries. And the first thing when they find out I'm in oil and gas, they ask, what have you seen? Have you seen Landman and whatever? But then they extol the virtues of what it is that we do, or the importance of what it is that we do. And you see this, and I can't think of when that's happened. Like, when has a popular culture thing that's outside of the source coming from industry, like, pop culture, Hollywood, talking about oil and gas in any way that's not negative, and much less talk about it sort of in a positive light and paint it positively. So I think it's actually been kind of an interesting thing. It's raised the conversation, and I think in a helpful way, and presented us, and if not in a positive light, at least not in a negative light. And that's significant progress. So it's been good for me and encouraging to me to see one, more outspoken industry advocates, more willingness for us to talk about it. And then also to see it gain some traction even in sort of wider pop culture. I think that's nothing but a good thing, and hopefully will help encourage people to think about this as a potential career opportunity, because we're gonna need it.
Well, and I want to. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was just gonna say I wanted to applaud y'all, because on your website, I love that you visualized the oil products, the petroleum products of like what you do, because I think sometimes people forget what the hydrocarbons do and how it's literally involved in every single thing that they see and touch all day long.
Yeah. I mean, so from a transportation fuel, so we think what we produce is mainly oil. So 90% of the world's transportation energy is provided by oil or oil derivatives, right? So the world's not moving without oil. But only 50% of oil is used for transportation energy. The rest of it's used for all sorts of other products, whether it be sort of pharmaceutical goods or asphalt or, construction materials, whatever it is. And so we think of oil as just transportation, and it is critical for transportation, but that's only 50% of a barrel. The other 50% produces all the stuff that's around us today. So if we don't have it, it just literally touches everything.
Yeah. It was crazy. We had our friend Soma on the other day, and he, talking about what you started to talk about at the beginning of the conversation as it relates to this subject. Growing up in southern India and gathering, firewood, dried dung, and he's involved with Bettering Human Lives Foundation, and his organization, and to hear that, I think is good for people to hear. But I think the other thing he said, which is kind of crazy, we were laughing about some friends of ours that started this little company called Yeti, and how all these companies that were in the fishing industry that, you would think had all this value, and in walks in a company that manufactures a cooler, and all those other businesses that are in this big show, their combined market value doesn't even come close to the market value of Yeti the cooler. And we were talking about that in the context of the energy business. And you put all of the oil and gas companies and some of the mining companies, their combined market cap doesn't come close to NVIDIA.
No,
which doesn't exist without
the energy.
Yeah.
And my concern is, I think there have been some folks that have started to speak out a little bit more. Chris Wright, Adam Anderson, the Alex Epsteins, the Mike Howards, Toby Rice, etc. You guys, my concern is that with the change of administration, some friendly faces there, that we're going to say, okay, our work's done, and I don't think that's the case. I think we have got to continue to make up for lost time and continue to educate and bring things to the forefront. And it has been great to see a lot of what we've done at Energy Talking Points get integrated into the script at Landman, which I've only seen one episode, but flying back with Lauren Singletary last week, he did verify that you can have an airplane stolen, as one did in the 80s when he was working. They had a plane stolen at a runaway, and it was being used to ship some stuff. So
Interesting.
anyways, but outside of that, yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. It's Hollywood, but the messaging, those moments have been great.
Yeah.
We've certainly seen a lot of tweets, and we need more of that, quite frankly. And you know, it. I think we need to ask our friends in allied industries that exist solely because of low cost, affordable, abundant, transportable energy that you guys produce. Start to speak up a little bit more about the business, because they wouldn't exist without us.
Yeah.
And I think, educating people that we are a fundamental business. And, those are one of the things you hear some of these investors talk about. I think I'd like to hear more of our leadership in various companies, E&P companies, service companies, midstream companies, speak to the fact that we are fundamental. We produce a commodity, but it's fundamental to everything. It's what makes modern life possible. What gives NVIDIA and all these guys all they become darlings of the stock market. Yeah. But anyway, I'll get on the soapbox. We're supposed to be asking you questions, not listen to me talk.
Well, you're making good comments.
What else we got?
I mean, of course, could talk to him forever, but I think we've got to be a little respectful of his time. So
Yeah.
we do the closing question, and at one point, you are going to have to come back on the podcast to answer the song question.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, she kind of puts you on the spot.
Sorry about that.
Just goes to show you these are raw conversations.
Yeah, we're all. So no advanced questions, just off the cuff.
You kind of sort of answered it, but I imagine you've got some other nuggets of wisdom, which we always like to close our conversations with. Any words of wisdom or advice that you'd like to share with our listening audience that you would have liked to have had when you were younger, or that you would like to extol on any of our listeners?
Well, you heard the most important one already, and that's this concept of stay humble and know you can improve. The other thing I would say is, I was really fortunate in my career to get exposed to lots of different opportunities, and I generally made the most of them. And as a result of that, I kind of moved up quickly through the organization, and I think if you don't recognize the role that good luck plays in that, you're just really being, you're kidding yourself a little bit. And so good luck always plays. You see any successful person, there's a lot of hard work that's involved in that, but there's a lot of good luck that's involved in that as well. And that's just an important thing to recognize. But the hard work is part of it as well. And if I had to give advice to younger people or to my younger self, it would be, and if it wasn't stay humble and know you can improve, it would be do a good job. And it's the other piece of career advice I'll give people, because and when I say do a good job, it's surpass expectations. And if you have a history and are known for surpassing expectations in big things and small things, well, you can really separate yourself from folks, and you get noticed really quickly. There's nothing easy about that, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of diligence. But for the individual who gets an assignment and does a better job than what we thought, and then we give them a role that we know they didn't really want, and then they do surpass our expectations on that. And then the reports they put together, and the emails they draft, and the analysis they do, all of it is like more than what we anticipated. Wow, that person starts to get noticed pretty quickly, and it's rare, candidly. But so there's no silver bullet, or there's no magic thing about it. But if an individual will surpass expectations in big things and little things, and get known for doing that, you'll get noticed pretty quickly. And I think it's a wonderful way to set yourselves up to make the most of an opportunity. And when that good fortune comes along, and you get a chance to be on a good project or whatever, and then you make the most of it, it can have a wonderful impact on your career. It's not. I think folks oftentimes, as they look for career advice, they're looking for a shortcut. There's not a shortcut. There's not a shortcut. It's a whole series of sort of good decisions, hard work, and a little bit of good luck is what makes a good career or a great career.
I think it's great advice. 100% true.
Yeah.
Embrace the suck, as they say.
Yeah, that's right.
So, well, this has been awesome. We really appreciate you taking the
Thank
time.
you guys for having me on. This is fun.
Yeah.
Welcome back anytime.
All right.
Yeah. And we'll be waiting for that song, Victoria.
Really excited.
And that really stumped
So
us back.
Yeah. I'm going to have to, before this airs, I'm going to have to send it in so you can like put a little addendum at the end. By the way, the song was X.
I think we should.
All right. So we'll make sure I get back to you guys before that goes.
Okay.
Well, good deal. We'll wrap this up. So you can follow us at oilfield360.com. Check us out on LinkedIn, Spotify, YouTube, etc. We appreciate you listening in, and we've got an excellent lineup of guests. Victoria, thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure. Please don't fire me for stumping him.
Yeah. Danny, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me.